What if I told you the most controversial sci-fi movies didn't come from today's streaming wars, but from the neon-drenched chaos of the 1980s? While arcade machines flashed and synth beats ruled the airwaves, filmmakers were unleashing visions so dark, so unsettling, that entire governments tried to wipe them off the map. In Reagan's America, where family values filled the airwaves, the big screen was quietly smuggling in dystopian nightmares that shook audiences to their core. And here's the twist. One of these films was so explosive, the director yanked it from theaters after death threats poured in. These weren't just movies. They were cinematic time bombs, pulled, primed, and ready to detonate society's deepest fears, leaving censors scrambling in the aftermath. Akira, 1988. What if an animated film was so violent, so politically charged, and so disturbing that entire countries banned it? That's exactly what happened with Katsuhiro Otomo's groundbreaking dystopia. Set in the ruins of Neo-Tokyo after a nuclear apocalypse, the story plunges into a world of teenage bikers, government conspiracies, psychic experiments, and urban terrorism. But what truly made this anime dangerous and revolutionary wasn't just its shocking violence. It was the undeniable proof that animation could go toe-to-toe with live-action cinema, delivering adult themes, sophisticated storytelling, and imagery powerful enough to haunt audiences for decades. With a staggering $10 million budget, every single frame was hand-drawn, creating animation so detailed and sophisticated that Western audiences had never seen anything like it. Critics marveled at its technical brilliance and layered storytelling, but censors were horrified. Here was a cartoon drenched in graphic violence, disturbing body horror, and scathing anti-government themes. The result? Bans across Eastern Europe, where officials feared its portrayal of student rebellion and conspiracy could ignite real-life uprisings. In Britain, censors refused to certify it at first, disturbed by scenes of children in danger and grotesque body transformations. German authorities went so far as to slice out entire segments exposing corruption, military oppression, and government abuse. But what truly terrified officials was its boldest message: that secret government experiments would always spiral out of control, unleashing chaos capable of annihilating cities and slaughtering millions. What terrified censors wasn't just the violence on screen, it was the dangerous idea behind it, that young people could rise up and challenge corrupt authority. Otto's dystopian vision struck such a nerve with officials that the film was branded as political propaganda, restricted in theaters, and forced into underground circulation. Yet what governments tried to suppress only grew stronger. Through bootleg tapes and late-night home video screenings, the movie spread like wildfire, reshaping both animation and science fiction forever. Long before mainstream audiences caught on, Akira had already proven that anime could rival Hollywood in spectacle, storytelling, and raw political bite. So powerful, in fact, that even censors underestimated just how dangerous a cartoon could be. Number 2. They Live, 1988. What if a pair of sunglasses could reveal the truth, that the rich and powerful ruling over society are actually grotesque aliens using ads and media to keep us blind, obedient, and endlessly consuming? That was the nightmare John Carpenter unleashed. And it was so sharp in its anti-capitalist bite that distributors quietly pushed it aside, fearing Reagan-era audiences weren't ready for such a direct political strike. Starring wrestler-turned-actor Roddy Piper as a drifter who stumbles onto this terrifying secret, They Live turned a modest $3 million budget into a weapon of satire. Every billboard, every corporate logo, every piece of advertising becomes sinister under Carpenter's lens, transforming familiar landscapes into tools of control. While critics at the time dismissed it as cheap B-movie fluff, what truly makes the film explosive isn't its science fiction premise. It's Carpenter's unapologetic critique of capitalism and media manipulation, a message that felt dangerous in the 80s and hits even harder today. A film that dared to call capitalism an alien conspiracy to enslave humanity was too dangerous for Hollywood to handle. Despite glowing reviews, many theater chains flat out refused to show it, while studio executives begged John Carpenter to tone it down, suggesting he swap the capitalist overlords for cannibals from outer space instead. The fear wasn't monsters, it was the movie's unflinching critique of corporate power. Internationally, the backlash was even harsher, with several countries banning the film outright or demanding cuts to its most radical scenes. What truly rattled authorities was the film's audacious claim that poverty and homelessness aren't accidents of society, but carefully engineered conditions, designed to keep the rich in power and the masses desperate. John Carpenter's film didn't just critique consumer culture. It made audiences paranoid about every billboard, TV commercial, and news broadcast, suggesting they were all tools of oppression and mind control. Despite its razor-sharp political commentary, the movie flopped at the box office with only $13 million worldwide, largely because distributors were too nervous to promote a film that attacked the very system funding them. But what Hollywood tried to bury, audiences later resurrected. Through home video and cable, the movie exploded into cult status, its message gaining sharper relevance with every economic crash. Today, it's celebrated as one of cinema's most biting political satires, proof that industry fears of its anti-establishment message were well-founded. Number 3. Videodrome, 1983. What if your TV didn't just entertain you, but infected you, rewired your brain, and reshaped your body? David Cronenberg's Videodrome posed that nightmare, and the result was so disturbing that several countries banned it outright, while others hacked it apart with heavy censorship. James Woods plays a sleazy television executive who stumbles upon a pirate broadcast of torture and murder, only to learn the horrifying truth. Watching The Signal doesn't just rot your mind, it mutates your flesh, transforming him into a grotesque organic video machine. What makes Videodrome truly dangerous isn't just Cronenberg's shocking practical effects, but his unnervingly accurate prophecy that media addiction and advancing technology could rewire human consciousness in ways more terrifying than any horror movie. The film's modest $5.9 million budget didn't stop it from pushing cinematic boundaries with Rick Baker's groundbreaking makeup effects. Most infamously, a scene where a man's torso mutates into a grotesque, fleshy opening designed to receive videotapes. The imagery was so shocking that critics were split. Some hailed it as a bold work of genius, while others dismissed it as exploitative filth. Censors, however, were nearly unanimous in their disgust. Several countries, including parts of Australia, banned the movie outright, calling its mix of sexual violence and body horror too extreme for public release. In Britain, regulators demanded heavy cuts, stripping away close-ups of grotesque transformations and any sequence linking eroticism with violence and technology. German censors were so unnerved by the film's premise that watching violent media could literally rewire the human mind that they initially refused to release it theatrically, fearing its ideas were too dangerous in a country already debating television's grip on society. The most disturbing twist wasn't just the gore on screen, but the film's audacious claim that consuming violent imagery could transform ordinary viewers into sociopaths, making authorities worry the movie itself might serve as proof of its own warning. Under Cronenberg's direction, the film becomes a nightmarish hallucination where reality dissolves into media-fueled fantasy, daring audiences to confront their own appetite for violence. But controversy came at a cost. Universal Pictures struggled to market such incendiary material, and the movie collapsed at the domestic box office with only $2.1 million. What makes Videodrome so unsettling isn't just its grotesque body horror, but how eerily it foresaw our modern world of screen addiction, digital immersion, and the psychological toll of virtual reality. Decades before smartphones and social media, David Cronenberg delivered a nightmare vision of technology fusing with flesh and rewiring the human mind. Yet despite its brilliance, the film's release was strangled by censorship and studio panic, with theaters reluctant to showcase a story that suggested media itself could be the most dangerous drug of all. Number 4. A Clockwork Orange, 1971. Few films have ever terrified both audiences and their own director like A Clockwork Orange. Stanley Kubrick's dystopian nightmare, released in 1971, didn't just shock, it provoked so much outrage that by the 1980s revival screenings, Kubrick himself pulled it from British theaters after receiving death threats. Malcolm McDowell's chilling turn as Alex DeLarge, a grinning sociopath who revels in ultraviolence before being broken by state-sponsored mind control, still unsettles decades later. The true controversy, however, lies beyond the brutality on screen. The film dares to ask whether stripping a man of free will, even a monster, is a crime greater than his own. What happens when art makes brutality look beautiful? A Clockwork Orange dared to find out. With its dazzling cinematography and Beethoven-soaked soundtrack, Stanley Kubrick transformed ultraviolence into something hypnotic. So hypnotic, in fact, that it unsettled audiences by revealing how easily beauty can mask horror. Critics hailed its genius, but the public backlash was ferocious. Outrage over its fusion of classical music and savage acts led to bans across multiple countries, while British authorities grew alarmed after a wave of crimes was blamed on the film. The controversy reached such a fever pitch that Kubrick himself demanded Warner Brothers pull it from UK distribution, a self-imposed exile that lasted until after his death in 1999. Few films have ever been feared as much as A Clockwork Orange. Banned or heavily censored in South Africa, Singapore, Malaysia, Spain, Brazil, and even parts of Canada, the film ignited moral and political outrage across the globe. Its most unsettling idea, that stripping criminals of free will through forced rehabilitation might be more monstrous than their crimes, hit a raw nerve during heated debates on prison reform and mental health. Kubrick's direction conjures a satirical nightmare that feels both absurd and disturbingly plausible, forcing viewers to wonder whether society is progressing or rotting from within. Even in exile, the film's grip on fashion, music, and pop culture was undeniable, spreading like contraband across the 1980s. Today, modern audiences hail A Clockwork Orange as one of cinema's greatest artistic achievements. Yet its shadowy reputation as dangerous, corrupting material lingered for decades, with revival screenings sparking protests, bans, and fresh waves of censorship wherever it appeared. Number 5. Escape from New York, 1981. In 1981, John Carpenter unleashed a dystopian vision so provocative that governments around the world tried to silence it. He turned America's greatest city into a maximum security prison, a decaying nightmare that felt less like fiction and more like prophecy. At the center of it all was Kurt Russell as Snake Plissken, a battle-hardened veteran turned outlaw, forced into a mission no one could survive, rescuing the president from the anarchic wasteland of Manhattan Island. What terrified officials wasn't just the violence or the grit of Carpenter's practical effects that made New York look disturbingly real. It was the message, the idea that America itself was rotten, broken, and beyond saving. With only $6 million, Carpenter created a post-apocalyptic vision so convincing it rattled both audiences and governments. Critics praised the direction and Russell's now iconic anti-hero. But behind closed doors, authorities panicked. But behind the praise came fear. Authorities in the Eastern Bloc saw something dangerous in Carpenter's Nightmare City. They banned the film outright, terrified that its images of rebellion and urban decay might plant seeds of revolution. What began as a dystopian thriller ended up as a cinematic warning shot, one so powerful, entire nations tried to shut it down. Imagine a film so explosive that both the Soviet Union and Western governments tried to silence it. That was Escape from New York. In the USSR, it was slammed as capitalist propaganda, while in the West, it was banned for daring to show America's own leaders as corrupt, cynical, and willing to sacrifice citizens for politics. Carpenter's 1981 vision of Manhattan as a walled-off prison colony seemed outrageous at the time, but his warning about crumbling cities and failing institutions turned out to be eerily prophetic. Audiences loved it, pushing the box office to $25.2 million despite the censorship battles. Today, it stands as a prophetic reminder of how fragile freedom really is, and how close fiction can come to reality. Number 6. The Thing, 1982. Imagine being trapped in the frozen ends of the earth, surrounded not by what you can see, but by what you can't trust. That's the terror of John Carpenter's The Thing, 1982. A shape-shifting horror masterpiece so disturbing it faced bans and heavy censorship worldwide. More than just gore and monsters, the film delivered a bleak worldview that when pushed to the edge, it's not the alien we should fear, it's ourselves. Kurt Russell leads a team of Antarctic researchers who uncover a parasite capable of perfectly imitating any living creature, sparking paranoia so suffocating that friends turn into enemies, and survival becomes more dangerous than the creature itself. What really made this film dangerous wasn't just Rob Bottin's grotesque, never-before-seen practical effects, so disturbing that theater owners got complaint calls after nearly every screening. It was John Carpenter's darker idea, that fear and isolation strip away our humanity, leaving us no better than wild animals. With a $15 million budget, Carpenter unleashed transformations so stomach-churning they pushed the limits of what audiences and censors could endure. Critics were split. Some marveled at its groundbreaking groundbreaking effects, while others recoiled at its unflinching bleakness. And in some countries, like parts of Germany, the paranoia hit too close to home, echoing Cold War fears of communist infiltration, so they banned it outright. British censors hacked away at its most graphic moments, leaving audiences across regions with watered-down versions depending on how much violence their market could handle. But the real controversy wasn't just the gore, it was the ending. A bleak conclusion hinting that evil had won and humanity's future was doomed. Test audiences were so shaken that Universal nearly reshot the finale altogether. When it finally hit theaters in 1982, the film flopped, making just $19.6 million domestically, as viewers flocked to Spielberg's heartwarming E.T. instead of Carpenter's cosmic nightmare. Yet, what was once condemned is now celebrated. Over time, critics hailed it as a masterpiece of paranoia, its themes echoing through everything from the fear of AIDS in the 80s to today's wildfire of social media conspiracies. The irony? The very darkness that made censors nervous is what makes it timeless. Number 7. Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior 1981. Imagine a world where gasoline is worth more than human life and civilization has crumbled into chaos on wheels. George Miller's post-apocalyptic nightmare wasn't just a movie. It was so violent, so anarchic, that several countries outright banned it. Mel Gibson, leather-clad and unflinching, roams a wasteland where survival is written in blood and fire. But here's the real controversy. It wasn't only the jaw-dropping car crashes or the bone-crunching violence that terrified censors. It was the film's chilling prophecy, a vision of environmental collapse spiraling into total social breakdown. Made on a modest $4 million budget, Miller's team risked real lives with practical stunts so dangerous and spectacular they've never been matched, even 40 years later. Praised by critics for its breakneck energy and Mel Gibson's raw charisma, this movie didn't just entertain, it terrified authorities. In New Zealand, it was banned outright for years. In Sweden, censors hacked out nearly 10 minutes of brutal vehicular carnage, terrified it might fuel copycat biker violence. Even in Britain, police pushed back, arguing the film was linked to a surge in motorcycle-related crime. But the most unsettling controversy wasn't the gore. It was the film's chilling message that society is just one crisis away from collapsing into tribal warfare over the most basic resources. What happens when a movie looks less like fiction and more like a chilling prophecy? The Road Warrior didn't just entertain, it terrified governments. With its leather and chrome aesthetic inspiring punk and metal culture, the film became a blueprint for post-apocalyptic rebellion. Audiences flocked to it, pulling in $36 million worldwide, even as authorities scrambled to censor its vision of a world collapsing into chaos. What made it so dangerous? Miller's bleak story of environmental collapse and resource wars hit uncomfortably close to home, foreshadowing decades of climate change fears and social instability. Today, fans hail it as both an adrenaline-fueled spectacle and a sobering warning about how fragile civilization really is. Number 8. Scanners, 1981. What kind of movie gets banned around the world for showing something so shocking audiences thought it was real? David Cronenberg's telepathic thriller pushed the limits of cinema with its infamous head-exploding scene, graphic, gory, and impossible to forget. Michael Ironside and Stephen Lack star as psychics whose mental powers are so destructive they can literally blow apart a human skull in a fountain of blood and brain matter. But the real reason this film rattled censors wasn't just the spectacular gore. It was Cronenberg's unnerving portrait of secret government experiments, illegal programs designed to create superhuman weapons by tampering with the human mind. Shot on a $4.1 million budget, the film's groundbreaking practical effects were so disturbingly realistic that many viewers swore they were watching actual violence instead of clever movie trickery. Critics hailed David Cronenberg's masterful direction and the film's chilling dive into corporate conspiracies, but censors were horrified by its unflinching imagery. Psychic violence, grotesque medical torture, and that infamous opening head explosion. The scene was so shockingly realistic that several European nations banned the movie outright, fearing it could traumatize audiences. In Britain, censors hacked away at the most graphic moments, close-ups of bursting skulls and surgical experiments on unwilling victims, while Germany went further, refusing a theatrical release altogether. For German authorities, the film's depiction of medical experimentation struck too close to the country's own dark history under the Nazi regime, making it a cultural taboo they wouldn't allow on screen. What made this film so controversial wasn't just the exploding heads or grotesque visuals. It was its chilling suggestion that governments secretly use their own citizens as guinea pigs in weapons experiments. Cronenberg dared to ask, what if corporate power didn't just control markets, but the very future of human evolution? For audiences in an era of rising pharmaceutical dominance, the idea felt terrifyingly plausible. Despite earning only $14.2 million worldwide, the film refused to die. Home video and cable transformed it into a cult sensation, fueling an entire wave of body horror cinema and cementing Cronenberg as the undisputed architect of biological nightmares. Today, modern viewers see Scanners not just as a horror classic, but as a disturbingly prescient warning about biotechnology and unchecked corporate power. Yet back in its day, censors waged war against it, slashing scenes, condemning its violence as too realistic, and treating its political undertones as far too dangerous for the mainstream. Number 9. Strange Days, 1995. Imagine stepping into someone else's mind, feeling their fear, their lust, even their death. That's the disturbing promise at the heart of Kathryn Bigelow's cyberpunk thriller, a film conceived in the late 80s but unleashed in 1995, so raw and unsettling that several countries refused to screen it. Ralph Fiennes stars as a black market dealer peddling illegal brain recordings, experiences ripped straight from another person's perspective, whether it's pleasure, violence, rape, or even murder. What made the film truly explosive wasn't just the graphic brutality on display, but its fearless dive into racial violence and police corruption, a mirror too sharp for many audiences to face. Backed by a $42 million budget, Bigelow crafted cutting-edge virtual reality sequences that blurred fantasy and reality, daring viewers to question their own voyeurism. Few films have managed to split audiences so violently, half hailing it as groundbreaking social commentary, the other half dismissing it as pure exploitation. This movie pushed boundaries so far that it was outright banned in multiple countries, not just for its brutal rape sequences, but for its shocking finale, the videotaped murder of a black activist at the hands of white police officers. In Britain, censors hacked away at entire stretches of sexual violence before allowing a release. German authorities refused to certify it unless major edits were made, and in Australia, the ban was absolute, officials declaring that the film's explosive mix of racial tension and sexual brutality was simply too dangerous for public viewing. What if a film dared to predict that virtual reality wouldn't just entertain us, it would corrupt us? That was the most shocking idea behind Strange Days, a movie that didn't just show violence, it made you live it, forcing viewers to confront their own complicity through Kathryn Bigelow's daring direction. At the time, audiences weren't ready. The film bombed at the box office with just $7.9 million domestic, its distributors paralyzed by how to market such dangerous content. Yet looking back, its warnings feel chillingly accurate, anticipating everything from viral police brutality videos to the addictive pull of immersive tech. Today, many see it as a visionary masterpiece that nailed the dark side of digital culture long before it became our reality. But in 1995, its explosive themes were too much for theaters, critics, and censors alike, leaving Strange Days buried under its own controversy. Number 10. Brazil, 1985. Terry Gilliam's Brazil wasn't just another dystopian sci-fi, it was so explosively political that Universal Pictures tried to erase it from existence. What followed became one of Hollywood's most infamous battles over creative control. Jonathan Pryce plays a low-level bureaucrat trapped in a suffocating totalitarian system where a single clerical error spirals into terrorism, torture, and the collapse of basic human dignity. But the real danger of Brazil wasn't its surreal visuals or nightmarish setting. It was the way Gilliam's razor-sharp satire tore into government incompetence and corporate greed, a message studio executives feared was far too subversive for mass audiences. With a $15 million budget, Terry Gilliam built a dystopian world that felt both fantastical and eerily close to reality, exposing how everyday bureaucrats become willing cogs in a machine of state-sponsored violence. Critics hailed its brilliance, but Universal executives panicked, trying to twist it into a marketable love story. Gilliam refused, waging a public war with the studio until bootleg screenings led critics to crown his version the best film of 1985, forcing Universal's hand. The result? A masterpiece so sharp in its attack on authoritarianism and corporate control that several countries banned or censored it outright. Banned across much of the Eastern Bloc and censored in the West, the film's real danger wasn't just its brutal depictions of torture or bureaucratic cruelty, It was its chilling suggestion that so-called democracies differ little from totalitarian states, hiding control behind paperwork and surveillance instead of open violence. Gilliam's nightmarish vision of a world where forms mattered more than lives struck a nerve in the Reagan era, when government surveillance and corporate power were on the rise. Universal, clearly rattled by the film's politics, gave it a timid release that left its domestic box office stalled at just $9.9 million. The film didn't just shape science fiction, it redefined it. Brazil stands as a prophetic warning, a nightmarish vision of surveillance states and suffocating bureaucracy that feels more relevant with every passing year. Its influence echoes through decades of cinema, cementing Gilliam as a fearless voice of anti-authoritarian storytelling. But this masterpiece almost never saw the light of day. Its release sparked a brutal war of censorship. Studios fought to sanitize its message, while governments bristled at its dangerous critique of power. And that's the point. These weren't just films, they were battles. 10 sci-fi masterpieces so unsettling, so unflinchingly honest, that authorities tried to bury them. From Carpenter's anti-capitalist invaders to Cronenberg's grotesque visions of media addiction, these stories didn't simply entertain. They held up a mirror to a future we weren't ready to face. They didn't just entertain us, they warned us. Long before smartphones rewired our brains and governments turned paperwork into weapons, these banned sci-fi films had already predicted the dystopian futures we're stumbling into today. From Brazil's suffocating bureaucracy to Videodrome's haunting vision of technology addiction, these movies saw it coming decades before the rest of us caught on. So here's the real debate. Were censors right to shield society from these disturbing prophecies? Or did they rob us of vital warnings about the world we were becoming? Also, tell me, which of these forbidden 80s sci-fi masterpieces hit you hardest, and which one should never have been banned in the first place?